Okay, so my presentation is called Student Attitudes and Perceptions of the Importance of Class Participation in a University Level ESL Classroom. And what I wanted to do mainly was collect some data from the classroom I was observing and see if there were anything that stood out between how the students themselves view class participation, and specifically with the Saudi students and the Japanese students, because those make up the largest portion of students in the class. Okay. So for my introduction, it says, this study explores the attitudes and perceptions surrounding class participation among ESL students at a large Midwestern university in the USA. This study will specifically examine survey results regarding their thoughts on class participation and its importance in the development of English proficiency. The study will specifically look at the results of Japanese and Saudi students, as those are the two largest culture groups in the class, with 4 or 5 students participating in the survey respectively. The other results from the other students in the class, of which there are 2 Korean, 2 Chinese, 2 Mexican, and 1 Vietnamese student, will be used as control data by which the data from the other 2 groups will be measured against. So theoretically, what would happen is you would have the Japanese survey results and the Saudi survey results, and then the collection of the rest of the students in the class, and then if there were any glaring differences between either one of these groups versus the control or versus each other, then you could look at those, and that's what would be the data that would be up for analysis. So that's what I was hoping to do. Here are my research questions, which I kept them pretty basic because since this is a survey that only involves one class, I didn't want to get anything too in-depth with anything that would involve anything that's not going to directly deal with these specific students, so nothing too general. So it's, how did the Japanese students in class respond to the survey questions about class participation? How did the Saudi students in class respond to the survey questions about class participation? And is there a noticeable difference in responses from the different genders in either the Japanese or the Saudi students? And how does the data from these 2 groups measure against the control group? And can anything be determined from this data? So those were the questions I had in mind before the study, and here's the methodology. It says this study took place in a medium-sized classroom. It looks pretty much exactly like this. Of 15 students and composed of upper intermediate university-age students. The survey itself was composed of 20 statements relating to class participation, such as, this is an example, I think it's important to attend class every day. And students rated these questions and then respond to them by ticking the box that best describes how they feel about the truth of the statement. So the 4 options they could choose: strongly agree, agree, disagree, or strongly disagree. And after the data was collected, it was then organized into a table by which the responses of the Japanese students, the Saudi students, and the other members of the class can be separated and analyzed. So the table will also be looked at with regard to gender. And the data as it exists within the table was then examined for any differences which may exist between the 3 specific groups. So there were 20 questions in this survey, and all of the questions, here's the example right here, I think it's important to attend class every day, were similar to this. There were questions like, I think it's important to not be late to class. I think it's important to ask lots of questions. Some of the questions dealt strictly with attendance and coming late, and other questions dealt with participation in activities during class and asking questions to the teacher and speaking with classmates and things like that. Okay. So for the analysis, it says the primary themes that are going to be discussed in the study are the Japanese and Saudi learners in this specific class, perceptions of class participation, and how their perceptions relate to one another, and also to the control groups composed of members of various cultures and native languages. So these themes are going to be analyzed through the collections and organization of a series of participation-related questions, which will be organized into 3 tables, which is 1 for each group. And the numbers in each category represent the number of students in that particular group who responded with that answer. So after a general discussion of this data, the data in the survey will also be analyzed with respect to gender within each of these 2 groups. So the table itself is, so you have a question such as, I think it's important to arrive to class on time. Then you have strongly agree, agree, disagree, strongly disagree. So there are 3 separate tables, 1 for the Japanese students, 1 for the Saudi students, and 1 for the students of all of the other various cultures throughout the class. So with the Japanese students, you would have, if all of them, for instance, responded strongly agreed to, I think it's important to attend class on time, then there would be a 4 in that section of the table. So you can look at the table itself and sort of easily determine anything that's going to stand out just based on the numbers alone. All right. The data will be deemed noteworthy when there is a large majority of students within a specific demographic who choose the same response to one of the statements. So this will include 3/4 response from the Japanese students, since there are only 4 students, 4/5 from the Saudi students, and either 5 or 6 of 7 response from the control group, because there are 7 students in the control group. The Japanese students responded similarly, or 3 out of 4, to statements 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 17, and 19. So very similar responses from them. And then the Saudi students answered similarly to statements 2, 3, 5, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, and 19. And 5 out of 5 students answered the same on question 19. So all of the Saudi students have the same answer for that one. And the control group answered similarly only to statement 7. So question 19, which was answered exactly the same by all the Saudi students, was, I have no problem speaking confidently in English. So all of them said strongly agree for that. They agree that they could speak English very well. And the Japanese students this was one of the questions where it was sort of flipped, and they were less confident about their speaking ability. So the data will be deemed noteworthy when there is a large majority of students within a specific demographic who choose the same response. Okay, moving on. So for the conclusion, it says this study found that though there were many similarities between the students in this class and how they answered the survey in terms of students within each specific group and as a comparison of each of the 3 groups to each other, there were a couple of dissimilar answers to note as well. Specifically with these students, the Japanese students were more likely to answer in agreement with statements which dealt more with attendance and tardiness, such as, I think it's important to arrive to class on time. I'm never late for class. I know the Japanese students answered basically in unison with, I make sure to study for tests and quizzes, questions like that, while the Saudi students were more likely to answer in agreement with statements which dealt with speaking, such as, I often ask the teachers questions during class, and I often speak English outside of class. So though these findings are interesting, it's not possible to make any sort of generalization outside of these specific students because our sample size is so small, it's just one classroom. So no, you can't really say anything about this data other than these specific students answered this specific way. In order to find something closer to this to happen in sort of a generalization, much more research would need to be conducted. However, I hope that this research, though minimal in scope, will still help to shed some light on the overall question of student perception of class participation. So the goal of this study wasn't necessarily to, obviously, to answer any sort of pedagogical question in terms of class participation, because the sample size is so small. I just sort of wanted to understand how the specific students in my class viewed class participation, and if within this class you could learn anything specifically about what the Japanese students or the Saudi students, what their views of class participation were. And there were a couple of interesting things, as we talked about in here, but I don't think they are, it's not something that was very surprising to me, but it was still interesting to learn. So that's about all I got. Thanks for listening.